Hello, guys. This is Jack, and today we're going to be talking about the most underrated films that I've seen this year in 2026 so far. It is a good time to talk about my most underrated films because we're, in the half mark of this year, and I've seen so many interesting films, and I think I want to share it to, my wide audience. But before I even do that, I'm contributing to a website that my friend has made for our other friends, and that is Pop Topic. I usually go on their podcast to, do rankings and talk about the Oscars and other stuff in between. But now I'm writing reviews. So you guys should definitely check that website out. I'm going to be banging a couple of written reviews over there along with, the same old stuff on Letterboxd. But shameless plug, I gotta do it before I start this video. But yeah, let's dive into my most underrated films of 2026. So I'm basically just going to go off the dome and see how far I can go through my most underrated films of 2026 so far. I'm going to start with the Corey Feldman versus the World documentary. This is basically a documentary about Corey Feldman and how he is going through his musicianship with the couple of albums that he's dropped and the tour and just hanging out with a lot of women. But what's really fascinating about this documentary is just his sheer ignorance behind the needs of what the women are going through when they're touring with Corey Feldman. There's a lot of interesting moments in this film, and there's a lot of ego-centric moments where Corey Feldman is basically kind of pulling himself as the guy who is trying to save music as a whole, while also his entire past has been, really sad, as he was allegedly assaulted by a couple of big Hollywood figures. And it doesn't go super deep into that, but if you know that context, you'll kind of get a bigger aspect of the film and what it's trying to say about Corey Feldman as the human and as the musician himself.
Bum, 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 you. So, first one. See, this is what I'm saying. I looked at you and you're standing there. I'll give you all four of them. Ready? Here they are. First one. Boom. Second one. Boom. Third one. Fourth one.
But yeah, this one was just so fascinating and unintentionally hilarious because of just the way Corey Feldman just presents himself. But I dug this documentary here, and I think you guys will definitely enjoy it. And speaking of another documentary that I caught this year that came out last year but is kind of technically a 2026 release, Video Heaven, directed by Alex Ross Perry. This is a really long documentary about the rise and fall of the video store era, and it kind of goes deep into the whole social economic idea of what video stores used to represent as a culture, and eventually now, since everything's fragmented and everything's digital, it's extremely long. It's nearly 3 hours, but it kind of gave me that YouTube sort of essay vibe, but in a 3-hour condensed runtime and filled with a lot of cameos by Maya Hawke and the Stranger Things kids for some reason. But I think it's probably because I think the third season dealt with the whole video store era of the 80s. But yeah, this one was really fascinating, and just really seeing the old iconography of Blockbuster and Family Video was really nostalgic for me, because I actually grew up watching VHS tapes and renting DVDs at these video stores, these mom and pop video stores, and the big ones like Blockbuster and Family Video. But yeah, this one was just really fascinating, and I'm glad this film got a lot of love last year and now is on the Criterion channel if you haven't listened to my voice. But yeah, this one was really, really fun to watch. And then the first stop that I'm going to, talk about from the Sundance Film Festival, the virtual film festival, is Levitating, which is a new film by Wegas. I will not pronounce the last name because I don't know how to pronounce it, but he did a really small film from a couple years ago called Androgyny, which I thought was fine. But I think this new one here, Levitating, is really fascinating as you're following a bunch of town people who are really into possession and spirituality, and they're trying to like cause a scene with like the whole idea of like pulling spirits out of people while also trying to fundraise money for their impending eviction from their places where they're living. And this one was just so fascinating because it's dealing a lot with like spirituality and also fantasy and dream logics. But yeah, this one was just like really, really fascinating. I really liked more of like the dance sequences and just how the film was really trying to pull the audience into those types of scenes. And I'm really excited to see more from this director. I think he's going to do more things as I'm trying to learn more about like his filmography. But we move on here.
Bayu bakal jadi prasut. Bayu bakal pertahanin pesta sambutan. Bayu bakalan jaga mata air. Bayu bakal pertahanin di kampung.
Next up, I have a really small film from a director that I really enjoy, especially since he does a lot of like Americana films. This new one film here, Carolina Caroline, is basically a Western meets crime thriller romance about two cross lovers who run away from their own history and try to rob a bunch of places, and they fall in love. And Samara Weaving and Kyle Garner is in this film, and they both give committed and underrated performances of this year. And I really had a fun time kind of like having that like throwback of the era of the 70s, where it's more about like the characters and like the scenery rather than like the plot. And the plot, we've seen it before, but I think it's just the way the director really tries to invoke those feelings of like the 70s era of thriller, Western, crime, drama, whatever it is that you can kind of categorize this film. The way it just moves, the way both of the characters are really trying to reach out to each other while they're in love, but also they're at a wits with the crime they're doing. Especially Kyle Gallner's type of personality. He's a guy who's just like, yeah, man, like I rob shit, I do all this crime shit, but like deep down, like I need to fall in love. And then Samara Weaving shows up, and it's like, oh man, this girl, like I love her, but I gotta like keep it, on the download with just whole romance, or else it's gonna like blow up. And you can kind of tell where the film goes from there, but this one was just, it was a blast to watch, and I'm really glad I caught this this year.
Care?
Hi, Daddy.
You all right?
Yeah.
And then next up, I have a really low-key family drama called Romera by Carla Simon. I've seen the director's films before, and I think this is her best film to date, in my personal opinion, as you're following a young girl who's trying to find her official documents of her family, and her adopted family is just like, hey, like, we can help you, just let us know what you can do or what we can do to help. And meanwhile, you're following like the back and forth between the family history, where it goes into like flashbacks, but also you're following the young girl who's trying to navigate these newfound information from her adopted family to her biological family. And yeah, this one was just, it was a really low-key, chilly type of like vibe film. Usually with these types of films, it kind of meanders, but I really dug like the scenery, just the way the camera was moving between some of the shots. There's also a really kind of like great moment where it does kind of flash back to the early days of the biological family, and it's really like breathtaking to like experience that feeling of like the past and then now the present with the main character. But yeah, this one was just really, really good. I highly recommend it. And then next up, I have a supernatural horror film that is very unconventional in a way. And this film kind of like brought me into some of the weirdness of how businesses are run, but in a more absurdist way. And I'm talking about Buffet Infinity. I don't know this director's previous films or the films that he's done before, but this film was just so hilarious to watch because you're basically following two businesses, and the whole film's basically shot just like a Too Many Cooks skit, but it goes on for like 90 minutes where you're going back and forth between ads and different ads from like different businesses that are owned in the same store front, and you're following one business who opens up a restaurant, a buffet. And the buffet starts out pretty nice. Everybody's going to the buffet. They're doing sales and whatnot. And then eventually another business shows up next to the other business, and it causes a whole dilemma, a moral dilemma where somebody's missing. There's also strange advertisements in between where some of the advertisements are calling out other you see like other advertisements calling out other you see other ads calling out other ads, and it's hilarious to kind of like watch that because some of them are just really profane and just like cursing at each other. And then eventually the supernatural themes start to happen, and it is very subtle. It starts out with like a weird sign or like a message from like one of the ads, and then it builds and builds and builds and builds, and the ending is just chaotic, insane, fucking wild. And it's one of those things where the concept, sure, it does stretch itself too thin, but I think the concept is so fucking cool that it's like one of those experiences that I cannot fathom. And yeah, like I highly recommend this film. And then I have another Sundance film that I already talked about on this channel called Josephine. Beth D'Arroggio directed this film, and it's basically about a young girl who sees an assault at a park, and it's her perspective, entirely shot in her perspective. And once she sees the assault, the whole film unravels, and you're trying to figure out whether or not the girl is truly traumatized by this event and how she's like navigating through the pain. And you have the mother and father, Channing Tatum and Gemma Chan, and they're both trying to keep the family together while all this stuff is happening with the girl. And it's a really depressing and fucked up film, but it's one of those films that I think you should definitely check out once and then never watch it again because of just the way it just depresses you, man. But yeah, like this one was just really depressing. I don't know if I will revisit this ever again, and I think it's coming out later this year. I'm not sure, but I know Samaritan Pictures has it, so I wish this film had a better Oscar campaign because I think all the performances around are really great, especially the girl, Mason Reeves. She gives probably one of the best child performances of the year that I've seen so far. Just the way she really tries to hold it in together while also being just a girl in the hindsight of things. It's depressing and also kind of crazy to watch on the big screen. But yeah, this one was it's a banger, man. A bad banger, but also a good banger. I don't know. This is another film that is really small, but also sort of depressing, but also life-changing. This one is Silent Friend. This came out last year, if I remember correctly. It premiered at the Berlin Film Festival, and then now it just came out this year. And it's with Tony Leung, big famous Chinese actor. He's been in so many great films, especially Wong Kar-wai's Happy Together, which I love, is one of my favorite films ever. But Tony Leung plays a professor who is really into trees and plants and how plants live and grow. and from the beginning, you see that he is trying to teach his students how to interact with these types of plants and trees. And then eventually it turns out that there's a tree outside of the university that has a lot of history and like a story to it. And the film eventually evolves into a history lesson with other characters from the past telling their own stories and showing what they feel and kind of see with like the tree that is in their backyards, and they telepathically kind of talk to each other. And the way I'm trying to explain or describe this film is very esoteric and sort of pretentious, but I was really surprised but also just in awe with just the way this film takes its time with developing all the characters and like the stories all around. And I didn't really like one of the storylines with the young girl from like the older history of the storyline, but I also did like the other two storylines with the college student and the other college student who are trying to learn how to communicate with plants that they are trying to grow with devices and speech. And it was really fascinating to kind of like see that happen in real time with just the way they're experimenting with the technology from the past. But this one was just, it was really meditative, and it's one of those films you have to kind of like sit with it and kind of meditate with it. And yeah, this one was just, it was giving, man. It was giving.
Sie sind hier, direkt zwischen uns, beobachten uns und denken alle möglichen Dinge über uns.
And then next up, I saw a queer film during Pride Month. I've seen a lot of really great queer films, older films, but this one kind of like caught my radar because it was like screening at one of my favorite indie theaters, the Jacob Burns Film Center, and I tried really hard to like check this film out despite some of the show times being a little bit spotty, but I saw it, and this one is called Departures. I think this is a debut by Lloyd Neal. And one of the main actors directed this film, Lloyd Morgan, and is starring in this film. And it's basically kind of like an autobiography about like this guy who has a lot of baggage with himself, the way he presents himself, how he's moving about with like the relationships he's having. And he is going to Amsterdam one day on a trip just because, and he meets this muscle guy who both immediately they fall in love and they have a really fun time in Amsterdam. And then it turns into kind of like an arrangement where the muscle guy is just like, hey, you can come to Amsterdam with me anytime and we can hook up and do all these things. But, you know, when we go back to England, don't speak to me, don't talk to me. We want to, you know, keep it on the down low. And it's a whole thing where the main character is rattling with his emotions, his body image issues, his ways of ego, and it's a really fascinating tale, a real tale that I think definitely reflects what a lot of queer people are living through today, especially me. I can totally relate to some of the things that the main character goes through. And just the way I think the film is also shot, it's kind of has like that BBC One type of vibe where the main character is doing like the voiceover and you're seeing and hearing like the main character talk about like their past relationships and like their history behind like their family and whatnot. And then, you know, also just the hookups they're going through. But it really depends on whether or not you really vibe with the whole presentation of the film and just like how the main character is acting. Because if you are not like on the wavelength of just seeing a ratty, rancid character, boy, this will not be for you. And I tried recommending this to a couple friends, and some of them were just like, yeah, man, like this wasn't it. And that's okay, buddy. But yeah, this one was just really fun, sort of depressing, but also true to the hearts of the queer community.
They say the best way to move forward is to go back.
Next up, I have a really small Japanese film called Two Seasons, Two Strangers. This film, I think, premiered 2 years ago, I think at Cannes or Berlin. And I've been dying to see it, and eventually it just came out this year, and now I finally saw it. And this one was another great low-key film about a screenwriter who's trying to write a romance, and it goes in between like metafiction and like, melancholy. And you see these two strangers, these two lovers who fall in love with each other on a beach. And eventually the film kind of evaporates into the metafiction section where the screenwriter in the real world is writing the romance that you see on screen about the two distant strangers who fall in love, if that makes sense. And it kind of like goes back and forth between that. You're having really intimate and calm conversations between all the characters around. It kind of reminded me bits of like Eric Romaire's films. Just the way all of the conversations feel realistic and raw and don't have any, inbounds situations. It's completely like out of bounds. And it also deals with like writer's block and like imposter syndrome with like the screenwriter trying to finish the romance, finish the story. But this one was it was really fascinating to see, and I'm excited to see more films from this director here.
久しぶりに楽しいと思いました。
So I have another great film here called Mile End Kicks. This is, I think, another directorial debut by Chandler Levesque. And basically, it's following a young girl who moves to Montreal to write a book about Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill album and just the whole entire career of Alanis Morissette. And it starts out kind of shaky where the young girl, played by Barbie Ferreira, is really trying to hold herself together with like the money situation, how she's really trying to put herself out there with like the relationships she's having in this new city, and just also in general just navigating through the early era of just like the music scene in Montreal. This kind of like takes place at a time where the music industry was still vibing with music criticism and like how music was going through like this changes of grandeur. And I really dug this film mainly because of like the history behind the music scene and like the music criticism scene. Barbie Ferreira's character is also writing reviews for music bands, and one of the bands that she is covering becomes their best friends, and it turns into like a romance with like the lead singer of the band. And yeah, like this one was it was like a throwback to like that early 90s 2000 era of like coming of age films where you're following these characters, they're going through like the stumbling and the falling of these relationships, and then eventually somehow they rise above it. And yeah, this one was I had a blast with it. Barbie Ferreira has been on my list for a while. She's been doing really great things. She's also did Faces of Death, the remake this year, which I really liked. And there's also other characters that appear, like Devin Boschik, the real Roderick from the Diary of the Wimpy Kid films. It shows up, and he does a really great performance. Jay Baruchel shows up for like a scene or a couple scenes. He plays like the big boss of like the magazine that the main character is working at. And yeah, like this one was it was a really fun coming of age film, and I'm happy that I checked this film out. I missed it at TIFF. It was like one of the first films that premiered, but I landed right after this film screened, so I couldn't really check it out. But now I finally saw it, and it was great.
I love Maryland.
Next up is actually a movie that could have been like on the top of my 20 spot list of best films of 2026 so far, but I think it was one of those things where I was just like, I've seen these types of films before, but it's just the performances that really pull you in and really make the film feel whole. And I'm talking about Tuner by Daniel Roher. This stars Leo Woodhull and Havana Rose Liu and Dustin Hoffman, and it's about a talented piano tuner who is kind of broke. He's working with the family, and Dustin Hoffman becomes sick and is in the hospital for the majority of the film. And this piano tuner is trying to find a way to make money quick so Dustin Hoffman's character can, become recovered by the medical bills. And out of nowhere, this piano tuner intertwines with I think, Israeli crime unit that is really into safe cracking. And from there, you're following this community of safe crackers, and they're trying to go to safes after safes after safes and crack them, and the main character is getting money off of it secretly, and it causes a whole scene. And then eventually the film turns into like a crime thriller, kind of like reminiscent of like a Michael Mann film from like the 80s and 90s. Just the way the film is like very like slick back with like its 70s feel like production. Leo Woodall gives probably his best performance to date as like this main character who is at odds with himself. He has a deficiency in hearing where he can't really hear loud noises, and if he does, he becomes anxious and has to constantly wear headphones or deafening headphones to combat those feelings of sound issues in his ears. And throughout the film, it plays a lot with like the sound design. There's a moment near the end which kind of like floored me, just the way the sound design was really creatively going through the motions of intensiveness with the character. But yeah, this one was it was really fascinating, and despite me seeing a lot of like the hits from a mile away, there is one twist in the film where I was just like, oh man, they actually did that, and I'm actually glad they did that because it makes the character feel worse, and also you feel, more in love with the character that you're following. But yeah, this one was great, and I'm glad I caught this. This was another film that I missed at TIFF, and now I'm glad I saw it this year.
Open the safe. Open the safe. Open the safe.
I'm just a piano tuner, man.
Now, this next film over here, I've seen it twice, and the second time around, I was like, you know what? Despite me still not vibing with the overall insanity of like the plot, I still had a fucking blast watching this, and this is The Furious, another film that I missed at TIFF because of like the screenings that I had. And this one premiered at the Midnight Madness programming for TIFF, and usually those midnight specials are insane, wild. And there's another film that premiered this year that is on the top of my list that premiered at Midnight Madness, which I will talk about maybe in the next video. You can probably guess, but The Furious is basically about a worker who fixes things. He has a daughter. They're living in, an area where they feel safe, loved, and the daughter gets kidnapped by a trafficking ring, and the daughter is about to be sold to a buyer, and the main character basically tries to find the daughter, and it's a whole foot chase, and there's a lot of like insane fight sequences that kind of reminded me bits of like The Raid and like Sammo Hung films. His style of films are very like campy, rely heavily on, just not dealing with like the laws of physics. This film is basically fuck physics as a whole because you're following just the foots and the kicks and the hand-to-hand combat and the knife combat and just like the flips and constant fighting between all the characters around. There's a lot of insane moments. There's also a moment where the characters are fighting in a freezer area, and they use ice blocks to, saw off one of the frozen people's heads off, and it's hilarious. And it's also just one of those movies where you just have to like turn your brain off and just watch the insanity on the screen. And just seeing it both times in theaters, I just had the time of my life, and I feel really bad for the people who did not check this film out in theaters. It's coming soon to digital, so I highly recommend watching this with a bunch of friends. crack up some, beers or, smoke a bowl. Just have a blast with this one because this one was just insane. And if you like the raid films and just 90s style Hong Kong martial art films, then this is the one for you, man. And you know what? I think that's basically it. Thank you guys so much for checking this video out. I'm thinking of doing my, top 20 films of the year so far list video pretty soon. I just have to see one more movie before The Odyssey. And then, we'll kind of circle back with that. Because I know if I do see that film that I'm alluding to, I might, drop that video quickly and then in 6 months' time, we'll talk about the best films of the year at the end of the year. I'm sweating, it is fucking hot, and I'm ready to just, get this video recorded and edited in time. So thank you guys so much. Like, subscribe, share, do whatever you can to spread the word out for this video. Follow me on all socials. Follow me on Pop Topic, the website where I am writing reviews now, and sometimes on Letterboxd, but mostly on Pop Topic. Thank you guys. Peace out.